Hi, Andrew.
Hello again.
Hello again. How was your week?
Actually, a lot happened of sort of fairly practical things, and a bit too much. And also, the physical situation is a bit up and down as well. There's just you see, the thing is that I do a lot of different things. I don't just, make these records with strange noises on them. I do a lot of other things, and some of them have nothing to do with that at all. And they all require a different kind of attention. So sometimes switching over between these things is a bit difficult because it takes time, and I don't have that much time for switching over sometimes. So you get these weird situations where not entirely focused in the way that I should be on what it is I'm supposed to be doing. I mean, if I teach beginners Tibetan, right? Tibetan language. And if part of me is thinking about some text that I'm supposed to be writing for something else, then obviously this is not good. I need to be focused on the Tibetan language and not the English language. And I need to be thinking about the meaning of these texts, which I'm explaining or helping people to understand, which are sometimes hundreds of years old, and it's a completely different way of seeing the world and a completely different way of thinking. And in some ways, they don't blend together very well, let's say. And there's other things as well, So anyway, so that's basically what happens the last week. Certain technical things I have to take care of as well, which are, if you've ever had to deal with any kind of technical problems with technology, then you know that actually it never ends. So. And it's not a question of when things go wrong. It's if things go wrong. It's a question of when they go wrong. So,
do you feel like Julius Caesar doing multiple things at the same time? Are you that kind of person?
No, I try. Well, I mean, sometimes I'm forced to try to do it, but no, I try to keep these things. There's nothing wrong with cross-fertilization. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having, using an idea from this area in another area. That's when all the great things happen, actually. But you can't have them all sort of blend together into some horrible sort of soup. This is not useful at all. And especially, my resources are quite limited. So I need to choose what I'm doing quite carefully because, it doesn't go on forever. And some of these things have to be set up in a way that somebody else could take over from them if anything happened, So it's not straightforward. Let's put it that way.
We are coming back to the topic of Estonia again because it's unavoidable, in my opinion. But you mentioned that people are quite slow in Estonia. I mean, that's a stereotype, of course, but it's partially true, of course. And actually, what I would love to mention is that do you think you're one of the, at least do you feel comfortable in a society that is way slower than you?
Oh yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I have almost nothing to do with the society here, so
you're completely in the isolation, right? Almost.
There's a few people that I teach, like I said, the Tibetan language to, and I go to the shop on the corner, which is about 200 meters away, and that's about it. So, I'm not in the capital city. I'm in a seaside town, which for about 2.5 to 3 months a year is jammed full of tourists, and then the rest of the year there's nobody, pretty much. And I like it that way. I think I like that, prefer it that way. And I don't go to art galleries. I don't go to bars. I basically don't go anywhere. So, so I have very, very little to do with the Estonian society. I see it very much from the outside. So anything I say about it is going to be very, it's not like, I couldn't even, there are Estonian elections on at the moment, and I haven't got a clue who any of these people are. And I have absolutely no desire to know either. So it completely passes me by. Completely. That's it.
Yeah. I guess there was a no wave genre, as we know, and I guess we should create a new musical genre which is not non-political, right? Non-political music genre.
It depends what you mean by it. Well, I think also, you see, this is one of the problems with language, is it gives this illusion of something being concrete and definable when actually it isn't. I mean, what is politics? So you have to first establish what you think politics are before you can say this. I mean, I'm not trying to make. Yes, it's a good idea, but first you have to decide what politics are, because politics, I have never been interested in what is normally called politics, but as I get older, I realize that there are certain operations which fall under that umbrella, which are of great importance, but not in this traditional normal way of thinking about it. So nothing is separated from anything else. I mean, there's nothing which you can say this area of life is not affected by any other area of life, and at some point it's going to affect you in some way. So at a certain point you have to grow up and say, well, okay, well, I don't care about politics, but there are certain aspects which are going to affect you. And if you get into the situation where you want to help other people, it's going to affect other people as well. So then you can see why people are attracted to it, for the good reasons and for the bad reasons. So the question then arises, well, is it possible to have no politics at all? Well, I don't think so, because I think you're always going to come up against it, unless you live in a hut in the middle of the forest and you grow all your own food. But then what happens if you're living in the middle of the Estonian forest and the Russians invade? Well, suddenly you're going to be, and there is a good chance that might happen. So the war drums have been beating from the Russian side of things on the Russia, Latvia and Russia Estonian borders for quite some time now. And already in Lithuania, was it last year or the year before, everybody got a little booklet saying what to do if the Russians come. And they had full-scale rehearsals of an invasion of the Russian army into Vilnius. So this is the Russian president, I beg your pardon, the Lithuanian president said that it was already happening anyway. And the little green men had appeared and all this other kind of stuff, just like they did in Ukraine. So you can say you're not involved in politics, but if suddenly a group of soldiers arrive at your door, then that's kind of being very involved in politics at a certain level.
Exactly. You have no choice at that moment. At that point.
Not really.
Yeah.
But the standard party politics and all this other kind of stuff, well, yes, of course, this is, but politics is a word which is very big. It's not limited to that sort of hysterical, oppositional sort of like which
newspaper stereotype. Right?
Yeah. It's not just that. It's all sorts of things, and you have to take on board some of it, even though it's a kind of a teenage thing to say, I'm not interested in politics. It's all garbage. Whoever you vote for, the government still gets in. All that kind of stuff. Which on one level is true. Yes. But on the other level, there are all sorts of things which do affect everybody, which are under that umbrella, under that heading. So just like with everything, you can't just reject or edit out bits you don't like. You are in the world, and the world is ruled by certain things which are not of your making. And, they will come to affect you at some point in the future. So do I have any interest in British politics? Well, absolutely no. But I do have to keep up with what's going on with the whole Brexit thing because I got a British passport.
Yeah.
So
still.
Yeah. I tried to get other ones, but it didn't work out. So yeah, that's.
So, I mean, it was even mentioned in the music scene. It really affected the artists as well. The whole sort of, I mean, the whole world was really pretty much affected by this news. But it's interesting. It's interesting how people stay with the same position and they have a certain view and they don't change that point of view, which is good.
Because this is the whole thing of like once you've said something, like I believe in this or I think this and stuff, you're not allowed, especially these days, you're not allowed to change your mind because that's seen as being weak. That's seen as being, and if you're weak in normal society, then of course you're useless. So
again, which is interesting. You know, there's a lot of generalizations in our language, not our language, but in language in general, which is normal thing, normal politics, normal society. It's very general. So there's
this wonderful thing that happened a couple of years ago in Australia where they calculated for the average Australian woman, the average Australian woman's height, the average Australian woman's number of children, the average, and so on and so on. All the different parameters. And so they calculated all of this, and then they couldn't find a single woman in the whole of Australia who was average. So
it's like the Charles Darwin era again is coming back, because the whole idea of generalizations, of being a creature that was actually a prototype of something, which is, you know, it's
well, yes,
it's an interesting topic actually.
Well, what happens is that, well, first of all, it's easier to generalize. Second of all, we're encouraged to do it because we supposedly don't have enough time to go into the details. We'll go into the details later, sort of thing. You know, we'll say this now, and then we'll go into the details later. And the third thing is, of course, it's very safe. It's very, but this idea that once you have said something, you're not allowed to take it back or to change or something. This is a reasonably modern idea. I mean, in the stuff that I've done, you regularly get this sort of, yes, but you said in 1981 that blah, 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 blah. And they go,
that's the whole journalism cliche.
Yeah, it's like, but that was 1981. Or on a personal level, I mean, you may have had this said to you, and I'm sure lots of people who hear this would have also had it said to them. You're not the same person as I met 3 years ago. Well, thank God for that, you know. You're expected to remain the same. And if you actually change on a personal level and also on a public level, if you change, this is seen as being dishonest. You're supposed to have come out of your mother's womb fully formed with all theories and all
conclusions,
all the rest, all in perfect state, and you're not supposed to deviate from that ever. And if you do, you're betraying. I mean, it's absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. And yet that comes up regularly. It comes up regularly. And this is one of the effects of all of this, is this historical rewriting that we see so much now, where people are rewriting their history so that it fits in with what they now believe. So, oh no, you know, when I did all that crazy stuff in 1979, actually I didn't mean it that way. I meant it in some other way. But no, actually you didn't. But you're just changing it so that you look good to yourself in the mirror now. That's really what it's all about. And this erasing of people from your past, or erasing events you don't want to remember, or erasing the fact that you did very silly thing and not serious, you know, whatever, that doesn't fit in with your image right now. It's happening a lot, and I mean, it's always happened. People have always done this kind of thing, but
people often forget that you and me are the living organisms, living creatures, and we can change. We can change.
What? I mean, do you believe the same as you believed when you were 5 years old? No.
Of course, no.
Is your physical body the same as it was when you were 5 years old? No.
No.
Do you think the same things? Do you believe the same things? Do you know the same things? No. So you're not your body. You're not your thoughts. Do you feel the same things? No. Your beliefs are not the same. What part of you is you then? What part of you is exactly the same as when you were 5 years old? And it's obvious when you say 5 years old, but if I say, do you believe the same as you did last year? That's a bit harder to answer.
And again, there's this interesting battle between words normal, usual, and what is expected.
Right. Yeah, exactly. If you regularly do things which are not part of what people expect of you, then again, you're a traitor. You're a terrible person. And why can't you just keep on doing the same thing as you've always been doing? In a personal situation, if you have, your friends and your family or whoever it is, if you make a significant change to yourself, they hate it. They absolutely hate it. And the reason is because they can no longer manipulate you in the same way as they used to. The buttons that they push are not exactly the same as they were. And this is one of the reasons why not just me, but I mean, quite a lot of people that I know get criticized so much but why can't you just do, 10 versions of that? Why do you have to keep on doing this again? Why do you have to keep on changing this and investigating this new area? Yeah. And you find that over time, the people who do this are the people who are the ones who end up respected and followed and all the rest of it. The people who do keep on doing actually new things and not just rearrangements of the old stuff, which is not new. I mean, it can look from a distance like it's new, but just rearranging the same things into a different order is not new at all. If you actually do anything which is genuinely new for you, some new area or some new opinion or perspective or whatever it is, this is commercial suicide. This is absolute you can't get away with it. And not just, nobodies like me, but I mean, especially the big people. I remember in the 60s, I mean, I wasn't there, but there was this outcry when Bob Dylan suddenly started playing electric. And there's a famous bootleg of this crowd booing him because he wasn't playing folk music anymore. Now, whether you like Bob Dylan or not is completely by the by. But you're not expected to change. You get frozen in people's minds as this particular thing or that particular thing. And if you go against their projection, which is all it is, their fully formed projection or image of you, there can be some really violent reactions. I mean, really, really strong reactions.
Yeah, I wanted to add something to your topic about the rewriting of history. No, everybody says that shoegaze was invented by the shoegaze bands in the 90s, but it's not actually true. The Velvet Underground invented shoegaze back in 1967. So the whole idea of rewriting the history is a very interesting and at the same time very sensitive topic to discuss. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've said this, I've said this in, other places before, but I mean, it's worth repeating. I mean, everybody who thinks about these things knows intellectually that history is written by people with agendas. I mean, if you think about it, of course, it's not the whole truth. It can't possibly be. And it depends on the political, ideological, spiritual beliefs or whatever of the person who's writing that particular piece of history. So you know that, right? You know that in your mind, but somehow it's not real. And then you get to a certain stage, and just like I am, for the last 20 years, people have started to write histories about things that I was involved in. And then when you read those things, it's like a completely different world. And you know for a fact that the person talking about this particular event wasn't even there, in some cases wasn't even born, and, just all this kind of stuff. And then it suddenly hits you as a physical force that all history must be like this. All of it must be like this. And then it's a different thing. It's not just an intellectual idea that history is written by people with agendas. It's now happened to you, and that makes it very different. And it can be very, very, it can almost be physically very uncomfortable to read this stuff, because this is now the truth. This is now out there, and in many cases it's printed in a book, and it will be around for a long time in some library or whatever. And this is what people are going to pick up, and they go, oh, it was like that. If it wasn't like that,
It's good that in the schools there's some old professors with experience saying that if you write for New York Times, it doesn't make you a good writer at all. So same with the history. And if you just wrote something on a piece of paper with the print and it was printed, then it doesn't make you a real protagonist of the story.
No,
because you wasn't there at all.
No.
But you have the ability to judge without any consequences at the end.
Right. What I'm talking about is situations which are not opinions here, right? So we know about this rashomon effect and all this other kind of stuff. But my father, who was a policeman, used to always say, if there's an accident and there's a whole bunch of people who saw it, don't believe a single word any of them says, because they will all have a completely different story. So, some people will see, like a middle-aged guy on a motorbike, and the next person will see a little old lady in a small car, and then the next person will see somebody on a bicycle, and then the next person will have seen a black guy in a Rolls Royce. It's just totally different because they see what they want to see from the situation. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when there is actually some kind of way that if a person was not physically at an event, this is a different thing to me believing that this person was a dragon, and then saying it. But I've seen at least as ridiculous things as that in the last 20 years in books. Things which actually are so far in fantasy land, but now they become real. Now now there's at least one generation of people who start to investigate all this old rubbish, and they have no way of knowing what these things were, because a lot of the people are dead, or they have changed their story to fit the new version, or or whatever. So it's this is something which I've been busy with for a very long time, right back to the very first Half the Trio record, which was playing and pointing out this whole idea of what is true and what is false and all this other kind of stuff. And I'm putting this book together, which is all about that record. And of course, it will all be about that too. And of course, today that's even more relevant than it has been than ever. The whole idea of fake news and so on and so on.
Even the music media is pretty disappointing to see all this, publications who change the rating of the certain album just because it's popular, just because it's a mainstream thing. I recently saw. I hope I'm not going to be judged by Pitchfork or any of the big companies, but it's interesting how they rated Daft Punk album. They put 6.4 for one of the most famous, one of the famous albums, and then the journalists changed the rating and switched to 10 points out of 10, and it's just totally, it makes no sense at all. So
no, but this sort of thing's been going on a long time. Obviously, as it's not a new.
It was going for a decade, when you're at a certain point, at a certain state as a publication, then you definitely will change your opinion. But I guess that's the way they perceive things, it's very subjective.
Well, this is one of the problems, or let's say one of the situations that we find ourselves, especially in the West, with this idea that subjective is somehow wrong. So this is one thing that Western science is really bad at, is investigating subjective claims, because subjective means untrue or unprovable or something like that. And actually, all experience is subjective. There is no objective experience. For there to be objective experience, somebody would have to stand outside reality and look in to watch it. And we know now that actually even the very fact that a scientific experiment is observed changes the results. So there is no such thing. And it's not just Western science which is discovering this right now. This has been known in various philosophies and religions for a very long time, is that actually the viewer changes what is being viewed. So objectivity is this illusion which is being given as this sort of promise that the high priests are able to do, but of course we are not able to do. And anything which is subjective is somehow not valid. It's, yes, of course you can have a subjective view, but it's not real. It's not like this objective stuff that we have, that you don't have. And this is, if something happens to you, your experience is real. It's real in a very, very real way. So the example that I always give is the magic trick. Now, anybody who goes to a magic show knows that there is no such thing as magic. And yet, people go there and they watch these people tricking them, right? And what is it they get out of that? And you have to ask yourself why, because it's a big business. Las Vegas is, a large part of Las Vegas is built on it. So what is it about these lies which are so attractive to people? And I have a big interest in it because I used to do a lot of magic tricks when I was a kid. And so it's always been something very interesting to me. So,
well, I guess poison fruit is always attractive. That's,
I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that. I think if the example I always give is that you can find very easily on YouTube or whatever, there's a magician called David Copperfield. He's one of the biggest magicians, if not the biggest magician in the world. And I personally dislike his style and his whole thing. But there is one thing that he does, and it's in a theater, big theater in Los Angeles. There's a film of it, and he flies. Now, we know that he doesn't fly. We know that he can't fly. But my God, he gets on that stage and he flies around. And then he picks a woman out of the audience and he flies around with her. Right? So when you're watching this, nobody in the audience thinks that David Copperfield can fly. Like, nobody. So he's not trying to convince you that this is really true. But for a very small moment, and even the biggest skeptic watching this is going to have a feeling of, wow, there is this falling away just for a moment of skepticism and doubt and all this other kind of stuff. And you open to something which is bigger than you. And it's obviously something that ever since human beings have been looking up at birds and wondering what it would be like to fly, and all these dreams that people have when they're flying, which he studied for 2 years before he actually put this. So this feeling of awe, this feeling of wonder, is what people want. They want that to happen. And as soon as you try to bring everything down to, oh, it's not real, it is real, because when those people are feeling that emotion, it's real. It's as real as anything else. And if you try to put that down and say, but he's not really flying, that misses the point completely. Does this make sense?
Yeah, sure. Again, I'm coming to the conclusion that there's so many, there's a lot of generalizations. And actually, again, it all comes to the same idea, which is what is really true, what is not really true in that case. But the thing is, I would say the customers, the audience, the public, they still, it seems very attractive to them still, the whole idea of the show. And
yeah,
which is just, you can, I guess it's like your internal perception, I guess. It's like your internal face, like your internal perception of the idea, and it's reflected in the things that you like.
Yes, I think I follow what you mean. Yes.
Yeah. So, and the whole idea is just you have a perception, right? You have a perception of the certain stuff, and it's your code. It's your inner code, I would say.
Yeah.
And you can change this inner code, because it's just, if you like this stuff, then you just. But again, would you change? Would you change? That's the question. Would you change over time? Are you gonna visit these shows again? That's the question.
So, well, you can't help but change. So actually the question doesn't arise. The question is, how do you handle it? So it's not, because you will change. You will get older. All your faculties will change. You will meet different people. You will read different things. You will have different experiences. And none of those will leave you as being the same person as you were before. The question is, do you try to ignore that change, or do you try to work with it? That's really the question, I think. And for most people that I know, they would feel better if they say, no, I don't want any change, because not knowing what's going to happen is frightening. Better did the English phrase, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. So that way lies a kind of misery, a kind of a disappointment in the world. Whereas accepting the fact that you're going to change, and that there's no way to plan for that change completely, because there's all sorts of unknowns that you cannot possibly know, then it becomes not a question of knowing what tricks to have in your toolbox. It becomes a question of, is your attitude going to be open and flexible so that you deal with every situation as it needs to be, rather than what you think it should be?
But again, being flexible means that you're weak in some sense.
Well, in modern terms, it's seen like that. But I mean, look at any willow tree. Look at anything in nature. If it bends, it doesn't break. If it tries to stay, really rigid and really tough, eventually it gets broken. That's why in several philosophies, water is the strongest thing of all. There's no rock which eventually will not be worn down by water. And yet water doesn't really do anything. It doesn't try. It's completely flexible. It does not shape anything itself. What it does is it's shaped by other things. And yet it's the strongest thing that exists. So there's nothing can withstand it. Nothing at all. And the idea of strength does not mean toughness. It's got nothing to do with toughness. Toughness is a very weak position, actually. If you look at it a little bit wider scope, you see that strength is always based on the idea to be better, to be stronger than something or someone, and eventually someone else will be stronger or faster or whatever. It's never going to last. It's this idea that we can experience a kind of permanence, even though we know that there is no permanence, because we're all going to die. So the next step is, of course, you get these ludicrous situations like these people who say, well, actually, you won't die if you don't believe you're going to die. And, the people who say, well, you don't have to eat, you can just breathe in a certain way and you won't have to eat. Trouble is, the people who say that you won't die, and the people who say that you don't have to eat get caught sneaking into restaurants.
Like cosmetologists with acne and fat dietologists, people that are completely opposite from their position, from their profession, right? Do you understand what I mean? Like, it's when you do certain kind of tasks and you're totally opposite, right? How you can be an expert in the field if you have an acne, for example. How you can be a cosmetologist and recommend and give advices to people, right?
Yes. You see, this is also a problem which I struggled with for a long time, about the whole idea of the guru. So the guru in the West, we have this thing of like the guru has to be this perfect person.
Ideal person.
Completely. And if they show any kind of weakness in terms of being human, then all of their teaching goes out the window.
Then the cancel culture comes into the mind because people start ignoring if you're not perfect.
It's 100% or none. Right? And so a teacher gets caught, accepting money from somebody. So instantly, everything they've ever said must be wrong. Or they find out that they've slept with one of their students or something. Instantly, everything they've said must be completely wrong. And if you have a sports coach, that sports coach doesn't need to be able to run 100 meters in 9 seconds, but they can certainly coach you about how to do it. Right?
That's a good example. Yeah.
You don't need to be an expert. You can be an expert on something, but you may not be able to do it. That's the lesson I had to learn with this. I saw this again and again. People would say, "Oh, but that person didn't do this or that, or did do this and this. Therefore, everything they've done must be wrong." And this is really a modern thing. I mean, of course, people are flawed. Of course, none of these people are saints. None of them. There is no such thing as a perfect guru. There is no such thing as a perfect teacher. There is no such thing as a perfect parent, which is what it goes down to, you see, because all these, without exception, pretty much all of the people I've seen get really involved with gurus are people looking for their fathers. So we get disappointed by our parents at some point when we find out that they're not perfect. So instantly, everything our parents, and this is during the teenage years or something, and then we find out that our parents were human. Oh my God, they're not these, perfect beings or whatever. Therefore, my God, what awful parents they are and all the rest of it.
Yeah, they try, when you're young, they try to be teachers again. So they take a certain position and they try to follow that trajectory of being a good teacher, showing you good things, what is right, what is not right, building your philosophy in your mind. But again, they're avoiding, in my opinion, they're avoiding the mistakes they made in the previous life, and they're trying to wish all the best to their kids, right?
Sure, which is a perfectly natural impulse.
Well, can you repeat that again, sorry?
It's a perfectly natural impulse,
Yeah. Totally. Which is, I guess, logical. I guess it's not a new topic, of course, but yeah.
The point being, though, of course, is that if it's not done consciously, you of course repeat it. So most family histories, you can see the same pattern happening again and again and again. It doesn't look like that from the inside, but actually it is. And we tend to seek out people who will reinforce this. So you probably know people who've married somebody and then they get divorced and then they marry somebody else, and it's exactly the same person but with a different body. And then they get divorced from that person and then they marry somebody else, and it's exactly the same person again. It's just another body, just a different body. And everybody else from the outside can see it, but they can't, because we seek these things. We unconsciously seek things. Now, if you move to a position of trying to be more and more conscious about it, that's where the vicious cycles can be broken. That's where the abuse can stop. But unless you're actually conscious of what's going on, then yes, you will unconsciously be drawn to people that remind you of your parents. You will be seeking in your partner the things that to you are familiar. We look for what we're comfortable, which we know. So
again, and you can be judged just because of the past bad experiences related with your parents, and it's obvious. You take the certain responsibility for the actions of your parents as well. You can suffer if, for example, your parents were not that good and had some sins. Sorry for this word, which is quite hilarious to use this word, sins. But yeah, if they had some sins, and then you take a certain responsibility as an adult, as a child, as a kid of this parents.
You see, one of the things in especially in the West, but I mean other places as well, but mainly in the West is, of course, there's no manual for this. And my parents had me when they were quite young, so well in England at that time, quite young. Mm-hmm. And if I think about what I was like at the age of 17, I mean, good God, really. I mean, it's a miracle I survived. I mean, if they were twice as, I don't know how they did it. I honestly just cannot understand how they managed to do it. And there is nothing which you're told about. I mean, let me tell you, this has happened to me as well. So you're not told how to do these things. Nobody sits you down and say, well, actually, what's going to happen is this, and this, and this. It's like some sort of secret you're supposed to find out every generation.
If you live in this relatively small place, then there are going to be like rumors, or your father was really an alcoholic or a drug addict, and you're going to be the same. Don't worry, you're going to be the same, because we have this phrase in Russia: apple falls right behind the apple tree.
Right. You have this in English. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
It's again coming back to the topic. We don't know what actions certain people can take.
You never really know. But of course, that's kind of what I said before, is that any situation is going to have variables that you have no idea what they're going to be. So making concrete plans for the future is, you're never going to get exactly what you thought it was going to be.
And all the great things happen by coincidence often, even the art pieces, and which is not actually pretty much related to the topic. But anyway, the coincidence is a very good thing.
I prefer to think of it as accidents, but the point being is that you can either be waiting for these things to happen, or you can provoke them. And that's one of the things that I used to teach in these workshops, is about how to provoke accidents so that you can use them, rather than just waiting for the hand of God to touch you with this divine accident so that you have this great idea, about how to actually provoke them, to make them happen when you need them, and when you need to have new solutions to situations, instead of having to use the old crap. And that's something you can learn. That's something that you can train. But unfortunately, we don't live with an education system which encourages that, because accidents and coincidences are things you're supposed to avoid. You're supposed to avoid getting things wrong. You're supposed to avoid making mistakes and all that. And yet the great inventions are mistakes, and they are people messing around with things they shouldn't be messing around with. And then the general attitude is to say, but we could have got there with logic. We could have worked that out, but we don't.
There's no universal equations to solve all the problems, right?
Of course not. So, X-rays, accident, penicillin, accident, television, accident, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
And the list goes on, yeah.
Yeah, my favorite is the telephone. So Alexander Graham Bell, I mean, there's several people claim to have invented the telephone, but the most well-known is Alexander Graham Bell. And he was very interested he'd heard about a method that submarines could communicate. So he wrote away for the patent application, and it came back to him, but it was in German. And Alexander Graham Bell's German wasn't very good, so he invented the telephone.
Again, by the way, today is the Columbus Day in the U.S., and today is a holiday. Yeah. So again, coming to the topic of Columbus, Christopher Columbus, we all know the story. It was an accident as well. So yeah, it's such and it's an accident in our discussion as well, because it's such a coincidence that today is the day of the greatest accident ever. Well, the greatest accidents ever in the world history. So
it is indeed. It is indeed. It's very good. So, so this idea of being wrong is, the Western education system is all about getting things right. But nobody ever learned anything by getting things right. You learn by getting things wrong and then changing your behavior. You don't learn by getting things right. But of course, you're made to feel like you're not a proper human being if you get things wrong. So rather than it being a mental or intellectual situation, it becomes an emotional situation. So getting things wrong becomes an emotional problem. And this is why people don't learn languages. For example, most of my adult life, I have learned quite a few languages, but many times in my adult life, I've had to say, do you speak English? And the answer is normally, yes, but not very well. It's not about the language. It's about how they feel about their own capabilities, and they've been made to feel bad because they can't speak the language perfectly. I regularly in the workshops, I will say there'll be a group of people and I say, who here likes mathematics? And maybe there's one person will put a finger up, but most of them, there'll be a physical reaction and they will try to hide in their seat as they remember some awful mathematics teacher at school. Again, this is not an intellectual decision. They are having an emotional reaction to something which is supposedly a purely intellectual thing. So you have to understand that a lot of the arguments and a lot of the so-called problems are not things you can solve by thinking. They have to be solved first on the emotional level and then on the thinking level, because the emotions are far stronger and far quicker than any mental act. So by trying to get people to stop smoking, for example, by telling them that they'll get lung cancer, by telling them that they'll get emphysema, nobody who smokes doesn't know. They all know that it's bad for you, and yet they keep on doing it because it's not a logical decision, is it? Buying a house. People don't buy houses for logical reasons. They walk inside the house when they're being shown by the realtor or the estate agent, and they go, oh, this is the house. And there's no intellectual reason for it whatsoever. People get married and live for the rest of their lives with people who have the same taste in clothes. This is not a logical decision, but all of these things are major life decisions, and they're not based on logic. They have nothing to do with logic whatsoever. And so we invent it later on, and we say, oh, yeah, well, I did it because of this, and this. No, you didn't. You did it because it felt good. That's all, that's it. But that's somehow supposed to be wrong. That's not real. That's not authentic.
But some people do buy houses because they have a certain analysis. They made a certain research, and they try to fit into the society by showing the other people how wealthy I am.
Yeah. And so, what is behind? Yeah, but now you have to ask your question: what is the reason for showing other people how wealthy you are? Why would you do that? Because you want to feel good, and the reason
emotional, right?
It's an emotional reason. It's not a logical reason.
So it's a tricky. It doesn't seem like an emotional, from the first impression, right? It doesn't seem like a very emotional reason, but then you realize that it's an emotional reason. So
yes, exactly. Okay, let's say you're at university or you're at school or just ordinary school, and let's say you've got a teacher who's a brilliant teacher, but they have really bad body odor and terrible breath, right? But on the other hand, you've got another teacher who teaches the same subject who's crap, but you are highly attracted to them.
Just because of the visual appearance, again. It's the whole idea of the dating apps right now, by the way. You judge people by the visual appearance, and it's not right at all, right? Judging just by visual kind of, if they seem attractive. Nobody thinks about the common topics that you might have in common. Intellectual abilities, of course, it's just the last thing in the list that comes to mind.
Sure.
So,
and I mean, but that's don't judge a book by its cover. Well, of course, everybody does. So and
because
again,
because that's the consumer society, right? We're all consumers. And I recently discovered actually an interesting dance floor album, which is like an electroclash album from the end of the 90s, which is called Fucking Consumer. And it's such a good name for an album because it really demonstrates the reality.
Okay.
It reflects the reality, I would say.
Yeah.
Demonstrates, reflects the society. Like, what do you personally think of the dating apps and all that stuff? I know that you're way far from this kind of stuff, but what do you personally think on what's your point on that?
Actually, I think the subject is very interesting. Because of the way that they force you to think about other people. Because as far as I haven't looked at all the dating apps, right? So, but what you're forced to do, and I'm not talking about the ones which are just for sex. I mean, that's a different thing. But the ones which are supposedly actually dating apps, like you're supposed to meet and talk to people, as well as, have some sort of romantic, is that when you fill out like what you're looking for, what you're doing is you're being forced by the programmer to select from a range of things. Now, if you select from that range of things, you won't see anybody who doesn't fit that range of things. So the chances of you meeting somebody who on paper is completely wrong for you, but you absolutely click with them, is reduced to almost zero. So because you're asked to select on what you can imagine, you end up with something which is going to be sort of what you want, but not really what you want. It's like my like Willem de Ridder used to say, it's a bit like democracy, where one person wants strawberry, another person wants raspberry, another person wants lime, but everybody gets vanilla. It's sort of what you want, but it's not really what you want. So these dating apps force you to think in the terms that you can already imagine. So anything anything you can't imagine won't come along. It's a little bit like the recommendations that things like Amazon do. So instead of suggesting things that are new and surprising, they suggest things that you've already seen. It's more of the same. So when you do these dating apps, you're looking for more of the same of what you can imagine. I'm sure everybody has at some point met somebody who, if you wrote it down on paper, you wouldn't want to meet them. And yet, just like with the house, when you actually meet the person, all that stuff goes out the window. That list of things that they have to have, or that height they have to be, or that weight they've got to be, or that job they've got to have, or whatever it is. All that goes out of the window because it's not a logical process.
I remember my English professor from the university, and she told me I was always attracted to men with PhD. PhD doesn't make you a smart person, doesn't make you a unique person. It's just you probably learned something, you probably worked hard on getting something new out of the contents that were provided. It didn't stay in your head. It was just a struggle, an effort to achieve your emotional needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
To show this document, to show this diploma, and to be like, yeah, I'm wealthy, but I'm wealthy in the other sense of the word, and the educational kind of sense of the word.
Yes, that's right. Well, it's it's collateral of some sort. I mean, what it does prove is that you were able to stick to something for a certain amount of time, I suppose. But other than that, no, it's like how we started talking off about the word politics. I mean, a PhD could mean anything. It could mean that you really did actually study incredibly hard and that you do really know what the hell you're talking about, or it could mean that you in some way bought it, because there's ways to do that, or you copied from somebody else, or you slept with your tutor, or what. It could be many different things. It could be lots of different things. I mean, there's no guarantee about it at all. Just in the same way as being a doctor doesn't guarantee anything at all either.
If you have an unsuccessful surgery, then you just lose your credibility. Professors often touch on this topic of credibility. I mean, it's very interesting how they actually provide reasons how is important to have a credibility in the American society, and it's really like if you're in an organization, you must have a certain level of credibility, high credibility. But people do not think that you might be an artist or somebody with a certain mentality. You're very sensitive to the society that surrounds you, and you might lose credibility just because you might think differently. So it's a very complex topic, but the credibility is just the first thing that comes to mind when talking about the professors here in the U.S. So yeah.
No, again, there's an enormous number of factors playing in the background that we don't really, I don't know about you. I certainly don't. I'm not in touch with those kind of things. But what does happen in any institution is that it ends up keeping that institution going and not doing what that institution is supposed to be doing. I mean, that's one of the first laws of system analysis, is that all systems eventually end up trying to protect the system, and all their energy goes to maintaining that system. And what they were originally set out to do is the least amount of effort and resources goes towards it. The absolute least. So transport systems are a great example. When I first started taking aeroplanes, you were treated like a treasured guest, an honored guest. And now you are an embarrassment. Now you're just another piece of meat to be moved as quickly as possible from one place to another. Hospitals, the medical system does not exist to cure diseases. It exists to keep the hospital system running. And you, as a patient, are to be dealt with as quickly as possible.
Because that's the whole business. That's the business.
Yeah, it is a business. It is a business. Any of these systems. And, it's called homeostasis. It's the same as human beings try to stay the same. They try to maintain the same state because that's kind of supposed to be healthy. Except if you look elsewhere in nature, if you see a body of water that doesn't move, it dies. Right? So this is it's all sorts of terrible things start growing in it, and basically that water dies if there's no water flowing in and flowing out. So anything to do with any kind of system, and it can be simple or it can be complicated. If it's just allowed to take over and there's no consciousness about it, which is what I'm going back to yet again and again, a system can operate quite fine all by itself. They can all be broken, but they cannot do anything useful if there's no consciousness about it. If there's no, I mean, it's like, who's driving the bus? I thought you were driving the bus. Oh no, I'm not driving the bus. I thought you were driving the bus. And so it's just there's no driver. And if there's no driver, the system will continue to try and keep itself the same. And the same is true of machines, and the same is true of social systems and transport systems and whatever, but the same is true of human beings.
The image is very important in our society, the image that you have as a human being, because again, people often like the visual appearance, the way, and again, if you don't change, then you fit into the society. But if you're not, then open question, what will happen with you in the near future?
Right. Well, I mean, all you have to do is look back in history, and you can see that what was considered to be attractive and what was considered to be beautiful changes in different cultures and in different times. If you look at the Flemish painter Rubens, for example, if you go to his house, and he was quite a rich man, and if you go to his house in Antwerp and you have a look around, and you'll see all these fat women all over the place who would not get looked at twice in today's society. And yet that was what was considered to be attractive then. So, yeah, because it's first of all, it's localized, and second of all, it changes. So you can look at movie stars. I mean, even as recently as that, if you look at movie stars from the sort of the early days of that, they wouldn't stand a chance today. You know, if you look at what and on the male side of things, you know, bodybuilders. You look at a bodybuilder from 100 years ago, and you look at one from, you know, a few weeks ago. There's
on steroids, right?
It just doesn't look like it. I mean, it doesn't look like they're the same race or the same species, rather. You know, so these things change, and the thing that we don't realize is that also mental things change just like that. So ideas become fashionable, and then they go out of fashion. Theories become fashionable, and then they go out of fashion. And the way that people approach the world, these particular attitudes, these come and go as well. These are not fixed either. And there's always this continual process of refining and refining and refining, which if you resist that and you get all upset about it and you say, oh no, because, you know, we have to have rules and we have to have these bases and stuff, like the Greeks tried to do. They tried very much, I mean, very, very hard to say, look, these are the rules of thinking, and we're going to call it logic. And this is the way the world works. And this is the only tool you're going to use. This is the only tool you need to use, because with logic, you can explain everything. Well, today, there's fewer and fewer people think this way. But the problem is that it's embedded in the Western languages, and it's embedded in the society. So the rules of logic, which are from, you know, roughly 2,000 years ago, we are seeing the world through that system, and the world doesn't fit that system anymore. And that's one of the reasons that language and the study of language and comparing different countries as far apart as possible is extremely necessary, and why translation, I think, is one of the most important things that human beings should be developing right now.
Not as we discussed earlier in one of the second interviews, but poetry shouldn't be translated because it loses the whole idea and the whole visual kind of.
Yeah, I mean, if you translate a poem, you're basically rewriting the poem. You're not translating; you're writing it. And you may, but you see, this begs the question that there are some people who can get. I mean, Samuel Beckett is a very good example of this. Samuel Beckett, was born in Ireland, and for a while was James Joyce's secretary, and then eventually he moved to Paris and started writing entirely in French because he said he could not express what he wanted to express in English. But he always allowed translations. He didn't do the translations from French into English himself, but he did approve them. And Samuel Beckett was known as being what we would call today, I suppose, ADHD or something like that. I mean, completely anal about every single detail. And yet he did see the possibility of it happening. So Samuel Beckett, who was, a native English-speaking person, but also obviously an expert in French to the level he could write poetry in it, could see that it was possible to do this. But I'm sure he didn't regard it as a translation. He just regarded it as a version. In the same way as you can take a song and you can have different people sing that song in very, very different ways. So it's still the same song, but in somebody else's hands, you may not even recognize that song. But it's possible to come close to the original intent, which goes to the whole idea of motivation and why motivation is actually in some ways more important than the final result. But that again is a bit of a heresy. That's something you're not supposed to say. It's supposed to be all about the result, and we're judged on the result, not the reason why we did it. And that's why, when I've been doing these reviews and stuff like this, is why I try to think about that and try to examine and to try and get as close as I can to finding out what the motivation is. Because oftentimes you can't tell. And when you find out what the motivation was, a whole world opens up, which is actually better than the final result anyway. So it's this separation of result from process, which is so harmful. It's a continuum. It does. These things don't come from nothing. They come from a chain of events which is incalculable because there are so many parameters, and the effect that work or that creative act or that conversation or whatever it is, that will have an incalculable effect as well.
You can push the buttons to control the parameters, of course.
Well, you can be like the captain of a ship, and you can get in your little boat, and you can go off. And if you are a reasonable captain, you know that you can point your boat in that particular direction, but you're going to get blown off course. The wind is going to come up that you didn't expect. The wave is going to come that you didn't expect. But do you get angry at the wind? Do you get angry at the sea? No. You just keep on pulling the boat back in the same direction that you wanted to go. Anger is basically the overwhelming desire to have things different to how they are. I mean, that's really what anger is. And so in that sense, it's completely useless.
Very egocentric position, right?
Very
angry. Yeah.
Very, very, very egocentric. And, things are not going the way that they should. I mean, there's a really a red flag if ever you hear people using the word should, like according to who? I mean, who says it?
Must. This must be cleaned.
Yeah, right, exactly. So if you are, and I'm not talking about some kind of like, new age, hello trees, hello clouds, hello sky kind of thing. I'm talking about being realistic, like the captain of a ship, who has to be realistic because waves will come along that you can't expect. All sorts of things will happen. But if you keep on pulling it back, pulling the trajectory of your boat back to where you will eventually get there. It just won't be quite the same way as you thought it was going to be. That's all. That's all. And there's no reason to start shouting at the sea or start, railing your fists at the wind. It's not going to change a thing. And these kinds of attitudes are things which are embedded in traditional societies. And the more technological we get, the more frustrated we get, because the technology, of course, separates us from those situations where the technology promises this perfectly ordered, controllable world. That's what it promises. That's what it gives the illusion of it being possible. And, of course, it's not possible at all.